The morning began like hundreds of others for Evelyn Brooks. Before the sun had fully risen, she was already walking through the hospital entrance with a warm cup of coffee in one hand and a small notebook in the other. She smiled at the security guard, nodded to the cleaning staff, and quietly made her way toward the trauma department. She was never the loudest person in the room, but almost everyone knew they could count on her when things became difficult. For more than 15 years, Evelyn had worked as a trauma nurse. She had seen moments of fear, sadness, hope, and relief. Long nights, busy weekends, and unexpected emergencies had become part of her life. She rarely talked about her accomplishments because she believed that helping patients was simply her job. While others looked for praise, Evelyn focused on making sure every patient received the best care possible. Her co-workers respected her calm personality. New nurses often watched how she handled stressful situations without raising her voice. Even during the busiest shifts, she remained steady. If someone made a mistake, she quietly helped them fix it instead of blaming them. Patients and their families often remembered her kind words long after they left the hospital. That morning, however, something felt different. Several employees were whispering in the hallway. The hospital had recently hired a new administrator who wanted to make fast changes. New rules appeared almost every week. Departments were expected to work faster, reduce costs, and follow strict performance reports. Many employees felt nervous, but they kept doing their work. Evelyn stayed focused on her patients. During the first few hours of her shift, ambulances arrived one after another. A construction worker with serious injuries was rushed into the trauma room. Soon after, a family involved in a highway accident needed immediate treatment. Evelyn moved from one patient to another with confidence, checking equipment, speaking calmly with doctors, and comforting worried relatives. Her experience showed in every decision she made. Late in the morning, a message appeared on her pager. Please report to administration office at 11:30. She looked at the screen for a moment. She had not requested a meeting, and no explanation was given. One of her co-workers noticed her expression. Everything okay? The nurse asked. I think so, Evelyn replied with a small smile. Probably another policy meeting. She returned to work without giving it much thought. At exactly 11:30, Evelyn knocked gently on the office door. Inside sat the hospital administrator, a human resources representative, and another manager she had barely spoken to before. Their faces were serious. Please have a seat, Ms. Brooks, the administrator said. Evelyn thanked them and quietly sat down. The administrator opened a folder. We've completed an internal review of staffing and department efficiency. Evelyn listened carefully. We believe your approach no longer matches the direction this hospital is taking. The words caught her by surprise. I'm sorry, she said politely. Could you explain what you mean? The administrator glanced at the papers. We're looking for stronger leadership, higher visibility, and more direct communication. Several reports describe you as too quiet and not actively involved in department initiatives. Evelyn remained calm. I've always focused on patient care, she answered. If there are concerns, I'd be happy to discuss them. The administrator continued without changing expression. The decision has already been made. For a brief moment, the room became completely silent. The human resources representative slid an envelope across the table. Today will be your final day. Evelyn looked at the envelope but did not touch it immediately. She thought about the thousands of patients she had helped over the years. She remembered families who had thanked her, young nurses she had trained, and nights when the trauma team worked until sunrise to save lives. None of those memories seemed to matter in that room. She took a slow breath. If that's a decision, she said quietly, I hope the department continues to put patients first. The administrator simply nodded. Within 30 minutes, Evelyn had cleaned out her locker. There were not many personal belongings. A framed picture of her parents. A small notebook filled with handwritten reminders. A pen one of her first supervisors had given her years ago after a difficult emergency. As she walked through the department one last time, several co-workers stopped what they were doing. You're leaving? One asked in disbelief. Evelyn gave a gentle smile. It seems my time here is over. The news spread quickly. Nurses looked shocked. Doctors exchanged confused glances. Some wanted to question the decision, but the atmosphere had become tense since a new administration arrived. Speaking up carried risks. One senior physician quietly shook Evelyn's hand. "I've worked with many trauma nurses," he said softly. "You're one of the best." "Thank you," Evelyn replied. "Take care of everyone." She walked toward the hospital exit without anger or tears. She had learned long ago that difficult moments often reveal people's true character. Even when life felt unfair, she believed dignity was something no one could take away. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright, and the parking lot was unusually quiet. Evelyn placed a small box into her car and looked back at the hospital where she had spent so many years helping strangers through the hardest days of their lives. She had no idea that before the day was over, people inside that same building would be searching for her with growing urgency, and everything they believed about her value was about to change. Evelyn Brooks drove home without turning on the radio. The silence inside the car gave her time to think. She replayed the meeting in her mind again and again, trying to understand how so many years of hard work could end in less than half an hour. She had never expected special treatment, but she had hoped her record would speak for itself. When she arrived home, she placed a small box from her locker on the kitchen table. Inside were only a few simple items, yet each one carried years of memories. She picked up the old pen her first supervisor had given her and smiled for a moment before setting it back down. Instead of feeling angry, she felt disappointed. Not because she had lost a job, but because she had loved serving patients. Helping people through their worst moments had never felt like work to her. It had become part of who she was. Back at the hospital, the afternoon had become unusually busy. The emergency department had barely finished treating one group of patients when another urgent call came through. A regional emergency coordination center informed the hospital that a military Black Hawk helicopter was bringing several critically injured people from a large transportation accident in a remote area. Because the roads were blocked, air transport was the fastest way to get the patients to advanced medical care. The announcement immediately changed the atmosphere. Doctors gathered around computer screens. Nurses checked emergency equipment. The trauma rooms were prepared with fresh supplies. Blood banks were contacted, operating rooms were placed on standby, and every available medical team member moved into position. The hospital administrator walked through the department, pleased to see everyone working quickly. "We're ready," the administrator said confidently. Minutes later, the sound of helicopter blades echoed across the hospital grounds. Many employees looked through the windows as the Black Hawk landed on the nearby helipad. The flight crew stepped out with calm confidence. Every movement showed years of training and teamwork. Stretchers were carefully unloaded while hospital staff rushed forward to assist. One member of the flight crew looked around the emergency entrance. "Where's Evelyn Brooks?" he asked. Several nurses looked at each other. "I'm sorry," one replied. "Evelyn Brooks," he repeated. "We were told this hospital has an outstanding trauma nurse by that name. We need her immediately." The nurse hesitated before answering. She doesn't work here anymore." The flight crew member stopped walking. "What do you mean?" "She was dismissed earlier today." For a second, nobody spoke. Another crew member turned toward the hospital staff with obvious surprise. "There must be some mistake." "I'm afraid not," the nurse answered quietly. The flight physician stepped forward. "We specifically requested this hospital because Evelyn Brooks has worked with emergency flight teams before. She knows exactly how we organize patient transfers during critical situations." The nearby doctors exchanged confused looks. Several younger nurses had never heard that part of Evelyn's background. One senior doctor slowly nodded. "It's true," he said. "Years ago, during a large regional emergency exercise, Evelyn coordinated the trauma receiving team. Everything ran smoothly because of her planning." The administrator, who had been standing nearby, frowned. No one mentioned that. The doctor looked surprised. It wasn't something she talked about. The flight physician continued. "She earned tremendous respect from several emergency response teams. When we learned today's patients were coming here, many of us assumed she would be leading the trauma department." The administrator suddenly looked less confident. Inside the emergency room, the first patient was carefully transferred onto a hospital bed. Doctors and nurses immediately began their assessments, but small communication problems appeared almost at once. Two teams reached for the same equipment. Another group waited for instructions that had not yet been given. Nothing was dangerous, but the smooth coordination everyone expected simply wasn't there. One experienced nurse quietly whispered to another. Evelyn would have already assigned every station before the helicopter landed. The second nurse nodded. She always seemed to know what everyone needed before they asked. As more patients arrived, the flight crew continued working professionally, but they repeatedly asked questions that no one answered with complete confidence. Who's coordinating the receiving teams? Who's tracking patient movement? Who's managing family communication? Different people answered each question. There was no single voice directing the process. The flight physician looked concerned. He turned toward the administrator. I don't understand why someone with Evelyn Brooks' experience would be dismissed. The administrator hesitated before speaking. Our review suggested different leadership qualities were needed. The physician looked directly at him. Leadership isn't always the loudest person in the room. Those words stayed in the administrator's mind. Around the emergency department, more employees quietly began sharing stories. One nurse remembered how Evelyn stayed long after her shift ended to help during a major highway accident years earlier. Another remembered that Evelyn had trained dozens of new nurses without ever asking for recognition. A doctor recalled several difficult cases where her calm thinking helped organize the entire trauma team. The stories continued one after another. Many people suddenly realized something they had overlooked for years. Because Evelyn never spoke about her achievements, many assumed she had simply been doing routine work. Very few understood how much of the department's daily success depended on her quiet experience. As another helicopter radio update came in, the administrator finally turned toward the human resources manager. We need Evelyn Brooks. The manager nodded. I'll try calling her. The phone rang once, then twice. Everyone nearby waited silently, hoping she would answer. Evelyn Brooks looked at her phone as it vibrated across the kitchen table. She had just finished making a cup of tea, hoping a quiet evening would help clear her mind. The screen showed the hospital's main number. For a moment, she simply stared at it. Earlier that day, the same hospital had ended her career without asking for her side of the story. Now they were calling. She let the phone ring until it stopped. A few seconds later, it rang again. This time she answered. Hello. The human resources manager spoke first. Ms. Brooks, thank you for answering. We know today has been difficult. Evelyn remained calm. How can I help you? There's been an emergency. A military Black Hawk flight crew requested you by name. We would like you to return to the hospital as soon as possible. There was a short silence. I no longer work there, Evelyn replied gently. We understand, the manager said, but your experience is needed. Evelyn looked out the kitchen window. I'll think about it. She ended the call without making a promise. Back at the hospital, the emergency department continued working hard. The patients were receiving care, but everyone could feel the difference. The staff was skilled, yet something was missing. The smooth teamwork that many had taken for granted had disappeared. One of the senior surgeons walked into the administrator's office carrying an old training binder. You should see this, he said. The administrator opened it. Inside were emergency plans, patient flow charts, and detailed notes showing how large trauma situations should be organized. Every page was carefully written, easy to understand, and filled with practical ideas. At the bottom of nearly every page appeared the same signature. Evelyn Brooks. The administrator looked surprised. She created all of this. The surgeon nodded. Almost 10 years ago. We've updated small details over time, but the system we still use was originally designed by her. Before the administrator could respond, another department supervisor entered the office. I found something else. She placed several letters on the desk. They were thank you notes from emergency response teams, visiting physicians, and regional medical trainers. Many described Evelyn as dependable, calm under pressure, and exceptionally organized. One letter praised her ability to coordinate care during a large disaster training exercise that involved several hospitals. Another explained how her quick planning helped prevent confusion during a mass emergency event. The administrators slowly read each page. Not once had Evelyn mentioned any of these achievements during her meeting. She had simply accepted the decision with dignity. Meanwhile, word about the situation spread through the hospital. Doctors began sharing stories with younger employees who had never worked beside Evelyn during earlier years. One physician remembered arriving at the hospital during a severe winter storm when multiple accident victims arrived almost at once. The emergency room was completely full, he explained. Everyone was overwhelmed. What happened? A young nurse asked. Evelyn quietly started assigning people to specific tasks. Nobody even realized she was leading until everything became organized. Another nurse smiled. She never ordered people around. No, the doctor replied. She simply knew what needed to be done. Elsewhere, another employee remembered something that happened years before. A brand new nurse had accidentally prepared the wrong equipment during a stressful shift. Instead of embarrassing the young nurse in front of everyone, Evelyn quietly corrected the mistake afterward and spent nearly an hour helping her practice the correct procedure. That young nurse was now one of the department's strongest team leaders. I wouldn't still be here without her, she admitted. Story after story filled the hallways. People remembered birthdays Evelyn never forgot. Families she comforted during long nights. Students she encouraged when they doubted themselves. Co-workers she supported without expecting anything in return. The more people talked, the clearer one fact became. Her greatest contributions had never appeared in performance reports. They lived in the confidence she built inside others. Late that evening, another phone call reached the administrator. It was the Black Hawk flight physician. Have you reached Evelyn? We've spoken with her, the administrator answered. She hasn't made a decision yet. The physician sighed. I hope she comes. So do we. The physician paused before continuing. I want you to understand something. I'm listening. Technical skills can be taught. Experience grows with time. But earning complete trust from doctors, nurses, emergency responders, and flight crews takes years. That kind of respect isn't given because someone speaks loudly. It's earned because people know they can depend on you when lives are on the line. Those words stayed with the administrator long after the call ended. For the first time since taking the position, the administrator wondered if important qualities had been overlooked while focusing only on numbers, reports, and appearances. Across town, Evelyn sat quietly in her living room. She wasn't thinking about proving anyone wrong. She wasn't thinking about getting her job back. Instead, she kept thinking about the patients arriving at the hospital. She understood how frightening those moments could be for injured people and their families. She also knew that every minute mattered during major emergencies. Her phone rang once more. This time it was one of the senior doctors she had worked beside for many years. His voice sounded tired. Evelyn, he said softly, I'm not calling for the administration. She listened without interrupting. I'm calling because people need you. The team is doing everything they can, but your experience could make a real difference tonight. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. The memories of the afternoon meeting were still fresh. So were the memories of countless patients who had trusted her over the years. She knew her next decision would not be easy. After a long silence, she finally stood up, picked up her car keys, and walked toward the front door. Evelyn Brooks drove through the quiet evening streets with both hands resting calmly on the steering wheel. The same hospital that had asked her to leave only hours before was now asking her to return. It was a strange feeling, but her thoughts were not on the people who had dismissed her. She kept thinking about the patients who had arrived by helicopter. They deserved the best care possible, no matter what had happened earlier that day. As she pulled into the hospital parking lot, she noticed several emergency vehicles still parked outside. The lights from the emergency entrance reflected across the pavement, and medical staff moved quickly from one door to another. The busy atmosphere reminded her of so many nights she had spent helping people through their hardest moments. Before she reached the entrance, one of the senior doctors came outside to meet her. I'm glad you came, he said with clear relief. I'm here for the patients, Evelyn answered. The doctor nodded. I understand. When they entered the emergency department together, conversations seemed to stop for a moment. Nurses, doctors, and technicians looked toward Evelyn. Some smiled with relief. Others simply nodded with quiet respect. Several younger nurses looked especially happy to see her because they had learned much of their work from her over the years. The hospital administrator walked forward. Ms. Brooks, the administrator began, thank you for coming back. Evelyn listened politely. I know today's decision caused pain, the administrator continued. Right now, our first priority is caring for these patients. Evelyn gave a small nod. Then let's focus on them. Without another word, she placed a bag inside a nearby office, washed her hands, and walked directly into the trauma area. Almost immediately, she noticed small problems that had slowed the team's work. Equipment had been placed in different locations. Communication between treatment rooms was inconsistent. Some nurses were waiting for instructions, while others were trying to manage several tasks at once. Evelyn did not criticize anyone. Instead, she quietly began organizing the workflow. She asked one nurse to monitor incoming patient information. Another was assigned to prepare medications. A third coordinated communication with the operating rooms. She reminded everyone to give short, clear updates so information would not be repeated. Within minutes, the atmosphere became noticeably calmer. The Black Hawk flight physician saw the changes almost immediately. "There she is," he said with a smile. "Everything is falling into place." One of the younger nurses whispered to a co-worker, "She's only been back a few minutes." Her co-worker smiled. "It feels like she's never been gone." Another helicopter update arrived over the radio. More patients were expected within the hour. Evelyn quickly gathered the team. She spoke in a calm voice. "We'll treat one patient at a time while staying aware of the bigger picture. If you need help, ask early. Nobody works alone tonight." Everyone nodded. There was no shouting, no panic, only clear communication and teamwork. As the next patient arrived, each person knew exactly where to stand and what to do. Doctors received important information. Without delay, nurses prepared equipment before it was requested. Patient records were updated smoothly. Families waiting for news were spoken to with kindness and honesty. The emergency department felt completely different. One of the senior surgeons quietly turned toward the administrator. "This is what we've been trying to explain." The administrator watched silently. For the first time, it became obvious that Evelyn's greatest strength was not only her medical knowledge. She had the rare ability to bring calm into situations that easily became chaotic. Hours passed. One patient needed emergency surgery. Another required immediate blood transfusions. Several others needed careful monitoring before they could be moved to different departments. Through every challenge, Evelyn remained focused. She checked on younger nurses to make sure they were managing the pressure. She thanked technicians after difficult tasks. She reminded everyone to take quick drinks of water whenever there was a short break. Even during the busiest moments, she never forgot the people working beside her. Near midnight, the final patient from the helicopter transport was successfully stabilized. A quiet sense of relief spread across the department. Some staff members leaned against the walls for a moment, finally able to catch their breath. The flight physician walked over to Evelyn. "I knew you'd make a difference," he said. Evelyn smiled modestly. This was a team effort. "It always is," he replied. "But every great team needs someone who helps everyone work together." Nearby, the administrator had been watching everything without interrupting. After seeing the department operate under Evelyn's guidance, the earlier decisions suddenly seemed impossible to defend. The performance reports on the office desk had measured numbers. Tonight had shown something those reports could never measure: trust, experience, respect. The administrator slowly walked toward Evelyn. "I owe you an apology," the administrator said sincerely. Evelyn looked up. "There will be time for conversations later," she answered kindly. "Right now, I want to check on the recovery rooms." Without waiting for praise, she quietly walked away to continue helping patients. The administrator stood silently, realizing that true leadership was not about titles, loud voices, or impressive meetings. Sometimes it was found in the person who never asked for attention, yet earned the confidence of everyone around them through years of quiet service. As the long night slowly came to an end, one thing had become clear to everyone inside the hospital. The person they had dismissed only hours earlier had become the very reason the emergency had unfolded with confidence, compassion, and hope. The first light of morning slowly appeared through the hospital windows. After hours of non-stop work, the emergency department had finally become quiet again. Most of the patients brought in by the Black Hole crew had been stabilized, and several had already been transferred to recovery units. Doctors were finishing reports, nurses were checking on patients one last time before changing shifts, and the feeling of tension had been replaced with relief. Evelyn Brooks walked through the recovery area, speaking softly with each patient she could. Some were awake, while others were still resting. She offered a few kind words to worried family members waiting nearby, explaining that the medical teams would continue watching over their loved ones. Her calm voice brought comfort to people who had spent the entire night fearing the worst. As she returned to the nurse's station, many of her co-workers smiled. "You made a long night feel manageable," one nurse said. Evelyn smiled back. "We all worked together. That's what made the difference." The younger nurse shook her head. "You taught us that years ago." Those words meant more to Evelyn than any award ever could. A little later that morning, the hospital administrator asked if she would join a meeting in the conference room. This time, the atmosphere was very different from the meeting the day before. When Evelyn entered, several department leaders were already waiting. The senior surgeon, the human resources manager, and a few experienced nurses were also present. The administrator stood before anyone else could speak. "Ms. Brooks," the administrator began, "I owe you a sincere apology." The room became completely quiet. "I made a decision based on reports and first impressions without fully understanding your experience, your leadership, or the respect you earned over many years. After everything I witnessed last night, it is clear that I made a serious mistake." Evelyn listened without interrupting. The administrator continued, "I've also spent the last several hours reviewing your work history. I read letters from emergency response teams, spoke with doctors, nurses, and former trainees, and learned about contributions that were never included in the information I reviewed." One of the senior doctors smiled. "She never asked anyone to recognize those things." The administrator nodded. "That may be exactly why so many people respect her." The human resources manager placed a folder on the table. "We would like to officially withdraw yesterday's dismissal." The administrator looked directly at Evelyn. "We would be honored if you would return to your position. In addition, we would like you to help lead trauma training and emergency preparedness so future staff can benefit from your experience." Everyone waited for Evelyn's answer. She remained silent for a few moments. The offer was generous, but the events of the previous day could not simply be forgotten. Trust, once damaged, needed time to heal. Finally, she spoke. "I appreciate your apology. It takes courage to admit when a mistake has been made." The administrator quietly nodded. "I also appreciate the confidence you've shown in me today," Evelyn continued. "But before I make any decision, I need to know something." The room listened carefully. What changes will be made so this doesn't happen to someone else? The question surprised everyone. She wasn't asking about salary. She wasn't asking about a new title. She was thinking about the people who would work there after her. The administrator answered honestly. "We're already reviewing our evaluation process. We plan to include feedback from co-workers, department leaders, and long-term performance instead of relying only on reports and short meetings. We also want experienced employees to have a stronger voice when important decisions are made." Evelyn smiled gently. "That's a good place to start." Over the next several days, the story of the emergency spread throughout the hospital. Staff members who had quietly admired Evelyn for years finally shared their experiences openly. New nurses learned about the countless times she had stayed late to help others, mentored struggling co-workers, and guided teams through difficult situations without expecting praise. The Black Hawk flight crew also sent a letter thanking the hospital for the teamwork shown during the emergency. They included special words about Evelyn's professionalism, calm leadership, and commitment to patient care. The letter was placed on a hospital bulletin board where employees could read it every day. A week later, Evelyn made her decision. She agreed to return to the hospital. However, she accepted for one simple reason. Not because of the title, not because of recognition, not because of the apology. She returned because she believed patients deserved experienced people who truly cared about them. Her first day back felt different. Co-workers greeted her warmly. Young nurses asked thoughtful questions. Doctors welcomed her with genuine respect. The atmosphere throughout the department seemed stronger than before because everyone had learned an important lesson. People cannot always be measured by how loudly they speak or how often they seek attention. Sometimes the quietest person carries the greatest responsibility. Sometimes the strongest leader is the one who helps others succeed instead of trying to stand in the spotlight. As another busy shift began, Evelyn quietly picked up a patient chart and walked into the next room with the same calm confidence she had shown for years. Nothing about her had changed. She was still the same kind, humble trauma nurse who believed every patient deserved compassion and every coworker deserved respect. The difference was that now everyone else finally understood her true value. And from that day forward, whenever new employees joined the trauma department, they often heard one simple piece of advice. Watch how Evelyn works. She'll teach you that real leadership isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about being the person others can trust when it matters most. That lesson stayed with them long after every shift ended, reminding them that quiet excellence often leaves the strongest and most lasting impact.